Welcome to the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Davidson, and in this podcast, we'll explore the art and science of negotiation in real-world situations. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, asking for a raise, or trying to resolve a conflict with a colleague or loved one, negotiation is an essential skill that can help you achieve your goals and build better relationships. Through interviews with experts, real-life stories, and practical tips and techniques, we'll deep dive into the strategies and tactics that can make you a better negotiator. From understanding your own negotiation style, to reading body language, handling difficult conversations, and overcoming common challenges, this podcast will give you the tools you need to negotiate with confidence and achieve your objectives. So whether you're a seasoned negotiator looking to refine your skills or someone who's new to the game, join us as we explore the world of negotiation in real life. On today's episode of Negotiation in Real Life, I'm delighted to welcome Karen Vickers. Karen is the CEO of ARC Wealth and the founder of Auxilium. Auxilium provides aged care financial advice to elderly parents and families when it's time to move out of the family home. So I'm going to be looking forward to having a chat with Karen about some of the challenges of negotiation in what can be really emotional and difficult situations. But firstly, Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Aged care is obviously something that's really growing in the community. How did you come to be in aged care, and particularly what drove you to starting up Auxilium?
I've been in financial services for over 30 years with my own license, and a lot of things changed in the financial services industry, and I had the opportunity to be exposed to aged care advice, and it just resonated with me. At the same time that was happening, I had a friend who was diagnosed with dementia without a power of attorney. All her family were in the UK, and her wealth and her health, well-being and everything was being looked after by the Queensland government and the trustee up there. And with that, she's got no decision-making capacity anymore. She still had capacity. I didn't know at the time where to go to get her supported, or even what my role could be in that to get her supported through it. So, it was really hard to see that happen to her. All the family in the UK, they're going to inherit everything, but nobody actually knows what's going on. And one of the things that came out of the tribunal findings was that the Queensland trustee does not have to provide a set of accounts to the tribunal unless asked for. And there's nobody here in Australia that's ever going to ask for them. So there's no accountability.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So that was one of the things. And then I was coming across so many elderly people that needed help, didn't know where to turn, didn't necessarily open up to their families about what was going on for them, and probably just needed somebody outside of that family unit to be able to guide them through some of the things they needed to do, and even guide the families through what needs to happen with mum and dad.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'm certainly getting to the age where a lot of my friends are having to manage elderly parents who are no longer able to stay in the family home or manage their own things. And it is one of those areas, I think, where people are at a bit of a loss. You don't do it very often. And so getting good advice is really important. But I think that's going to be really interesting in terms of looking at the negotiation and conflict aspect of all of this, because it is an area where there can be quite a lot of conflict and some very challenging conversations. How does that fit with what you do? I mean, you're giving financial advice. Where does the conflict and negotiation aspect fit in what you do for people?
It gets involved with the children of the family members or blended families of different things. So I can give you some examples of, I was recently dealing with a client that had a large amount of wealth, and one of the children was looking after everything and getting everything organised. Another of the children had been disowned by the father who'd previously died, passed all his assets on to mum. Mum's gone into aged care. And children, just backstepping, children don't always know what their parents have got. It's not
absolutely.
an open conversation around things, and parents have never had an open conversation about how they want things to be for them because they're in denial, like most people. And then the children get involved and they're trying to work it out. So this one daughter who came back into the fold has then come in, as she's the eldest, determining everything that should happen. And it's creating quite a lot of conflict between 4 daughters on what should be the right thing to happen. And what everybody's got a different idea and a different agenda. And especially when it comes down to the welfare of the parent and also the finances of the parent. Some will want to sell the home, some won't want to sell the home. They want to keep it for distributing when mum dies. And they've all got different agendas and they've all got different histories in that family. So having an open conversation that's actually going to get them somewhere with all their history doesn't always work.
Yeah, it can be a real challenge, can't it? Because there's often, as you said, there's that big history and it's things that happened a long time ago in the past that are leading to people feeling the way that they are. And I guess what you also get is that sort of misaligned interest where some people are more worried about just getting their hands on the money and some people are much more concerned with actually the welfare of mum or dad that are there.
And some of them just want to be in control.
Yeah.
I was another person that didn't actually come to me for services, but I bumped into the son of this person and he was sitting down and he's got conflict with his sister and 2 other powers of attorney. And his sister's pulling some strings around things. He just wants mum and dad in the same place together. And right now they're separated after being living in, and married for so many years that they've actually gone backwards because they're not in the same home.
Yeah.
And even getting his sister to agree for them to be in the same home together. And that's a big problem. That you've got this sister who doesn't want them, but it's not necessarily in the best interest of mum and dad.
I guess that's interesting. And so do you get involved in actually helping them through these negotiations? What's your role in relation to that?
I get to be a voice of reason with them. And I think when it starts with the financial piece, you have a real clarity on what the best options financially are for the people. So if you can go in at that level, you can just open it up and that will resolve some of the conflict. It's then being the voice of reason about, well, come on, guys, this is not in your mum and dad's best interest and giving a bit of coaching and mentoring. But I certainly at the moment don't have the skill set to be able to dig deep into what's going on and to actually bring them to a mutual satisfying conclusion on that it's the right thing to do and everyone's benefiting from it somehow.
Yeah. So I guess you will have seen examples where families have actually managed some of these difficult situations quite well compared to the ones where it's all gone, badly. What do you see the families doing that helps them get to good outcomes rather than ending up in sort of bigger conflict?
I think once mum and dad have got into that situation where there's been no pre-planning, I think with the children being on the same page and everything being open and transparent, I think it's understanding what their skill sets are and what their roles are in looking after mum and dad. If they get to know those and they communicate effectively, I think that it can work reasonably well. And nothing's perfect.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think, that preparation, as you said, I mean, if this is actually discussed earlier with mum and dad while they're still capable of doing it, and then you're going to have less problems all up. It's that whole thing, isn't it? A stitch in time saves nine, all of those sort of old-fashioned proverbs that actually make sense. But then you've sort of gone on about, and the reality is for many people, they don't want to have those conversations. We don't want to actually accept that we're getting older and that things might get to a point where we're not able to look after ourselves. So I can understand why some people avoid those. But then you've sort of talked about the importance of open conversation. Have you seen anything where that's worked really well or some examples that you could share?
Yeah, look, I had a client come to me. Mum and dad wanted to move into a retirement village. And mum and dad had made this decision to move into a retirement village. And the kids were actually really concerned and worried about the financial impact. And they didn't understand it. So somebody reached out to me and said, look, this is what mum and dad wants to do. And I was like, okay, well, how do you feel about that? You're obviously not feeling good. They just didn't understand it. They have exit fees coming out of retirement homes. They were worried about were mum and dad making the right decision.
Yeah.
So I actually spent some time with all three children on a Zoom and went through the different things why mum and dad might be making these decisions, how they could support mum and dad making these decisions, trying to explain to them what it meant going into a retirement village and why it was a good thing and why it was probably what the downsides of it were, both financially and, from a social point of view, and just said you need to have this conversation with your mum and dad. You need to tell them that, support them in their decisions because they've made up their minds.
Yeah.
And if you don't support them in these decisions, then you're going to have some conflict with your parents. So support them in it, but know what the outcomes are and what the next steps are as well afterwards. So it's all about planning and preparation.
Yeah, and it's so important too because it's understanding. I think what I've heard you say there is it's really about, the parents ultimately have the choice. If they've still got capacity, ultimately they can do what they like, and it's more about how does the family stick together. But the concern from the children, I guess, is, well, are mum and dad making a wise decision? Is it actually in the best interests for them? And do they actually know what they're getting into? And you talked about, the fact that there are different fees and ideas, and I know it's pretty complex, the aged care framework, in terms of how much do you put in, how much do you pay, how much do you get out at the end. So coming in and getting that expertise to actually give you clarity, because, I know I've heard of people, a lot of people who have really bad things to say about certain experiences they've had with aged care homes, but others who've loved them. And I think a lot of that is about not actually understanding what you're going to get into. So having that information and the clarity so that both parties understand what this actually is rather than working off assumptions about what they might have heard. Sounds really important.
And I think as well, you have your preconceived ideas when you go into an aged care facility or your parents are going into an aged care facility. When you go in there as well, you're not necessarily going to get the services. Conflict between the families and the aged care facility sometimes too, in the mismatch of what the children expect for their families and what the aged care facility can deliver.
Yeah.
We haven't done their preparation on finding out what those deliverables should be before mum and dad moves in and pick the place that's going to deliver on those.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing as well, isn't it? And I know, I've come across some people who their expectations of what's going to be delivered by an aged care home is almost the level of care that they would give mum and dad if they were in their own home, if they were coming and moving in with the child, which I think, the reality is for a commercial operation and for an operation that's looking after multiple people, you're never going to get that level of one-on-one care. So having sort of clarity, as you said, about, what is that particular facility, what are their ratios, what is expected of them, and what role do the children still play in the ongoing care, even though they're not there day to day.
That's right. And the young parents still need somebody to advocate for them. They still need somebody there to oversee what's going on, to support mum and dad in those facilities. I went to one facility and the father had been complaining about the food and wasn't eating the food. And I'd sat down with the nursing director for something else and said, look, he's having a problem with this. And I was with their wife who had very bad English at the time. And she sat there and she told me that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the food. Some people just get picky. And yet on her desk in front of me, there were all these written notes from residents or from the kids that were all saying the food was dreadful. And I think she realised. And it's like you don't always get the truth, especially when you're sitting down with somebody about what's going on there. And when those elderly parents have got something to say, there's probably something in it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I would expect is, once again, if you're going in, if you're the child who's advocating for the parent, if the parent's been complaining about something, I think you need to go into those conversations with the staff at the home, being strong and being willing to advocate, but also not going in being really combative about it. So you've actually got to go in and say, look, this is what Dad's saying. I'm trying to understand. Can you help me get a picture of what's going on here. How do you see things? And really understand where they're coming from before you sort of go in all guns blazing, so that you actually create a relationship where they're happy to work with you and talk to you, rather than going, oh my God, this person is too in my face. I don't ever want to listen to them, and they'll shut the conversation down.
Yeah, and I think that but when your parents are in somewhere like that, we all get emotional about our parents being in there. We want the best care for them. We're feeling guilty. We're feeling time poor because we've got families, we've got work, we've got other things, we've got guilt around things because we can't be there as much for them. So we've got all these other emotions that are boiling up under the surface that when we go in, we just want it sorted out and we want it right and we want it our way, because then that will take a lot of our plate. If we can get the resolution we want, we're not always good, or children of those parents are not always good at handling those negotiations.
Absolutely. And that's where I think, having that support for people, or knowing, I talk about these situations. Yes, you can come in and you can go, this is the outcome that I want, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to give them all the reasons why they need to change the menu. For example, Dad doesn't like the food. Dad's never been used to food that's really bland. He likes a bit of spice in his food and everything's so tasteless, he doesn't like it. So rather than going in and saying, well, this is what you've got to do, this is what you need to do to fix the problem, and going in very quickly with a solution, slowing down that approach to go, look, how do you go about menu planning? What are the things that you, what are the kind of factors that you're considering in the menu? What are the opportunities for, different cuisines and spices and things? Taking the time to sort of go in slowly and ask those questions and build that understanding is actually going to get you to an outcome much faster most times.
Absolutely. And if you go in with that sort of approach, they may take on some of those ideas. And this could be really good for our residents. It makes them look good. And I think that it's really about making them look good.
Yes.
And then building up their reputation as well.
I love that. That's like Bill Urey, who's one of the negotiation experts whose work I love. He talks about this idea in a negotiation of building a golden bridge. It's that idea about how can I actually position this so that it's a win for you and you look good to your other stakeholders, and I get what I want. Absolutely. Yeah. And it works beautifully because it's that ultimate sort of concept of win-win. You get to actually put something together that is going to enhance your relationships with the residents or the other sort of stakeholders, and I get what I want as well.
Yeah,
so I love that idea.
It's quite a scary area, this whole elderly people, aged care, their needs, families. It's a real mix where we don't plan for. We don't know anything about it until it happens. It's not. It might slowly be creeping in because we can see family members deteriorating, but it's not until they've been told that they can't go home anymore, or the children have said your parents can't go home anymore. They can't look after themselves either because they're physically or mentally incapacitated, that they actually start thinking about these. And that's why I think it's important about having some of these conversations up front and doing it in a very gentle way, negotiating those things and those milestones with the parent and guiding them slowly through where you believe. We don't have all the answers as children. We think we know what's right for mum and dad, but mum and dad don't want to hear it. It's like teenage children. We think we know what's right for teenage children. They don't want to know.
Oh, tell me about it. No, I think that's absolutely right, isn't it? And by getting prepared early as the adult child of aging parents, just being able to drop things into the conversation over a period of years as they're getting to that stage is really helpful, because one, it sort of gives them information. It's actually normalizing the idea that having to move out of the family home is sort of normal. So you can drop it in, not even in relation to them directly, but just making, talking about aged care homes, talking about people there, good experiences, talking about the financial planning aspects sort of normalises that, so that when you come to the conversation, it's not so bad, but it also gives them information. You can drop information into the conversation over the years leading up to this, so that they then are already equipped a little bit more to make their own decision and preserve their sense of autonomy. Because I think, certainly my experience, I remember having a grandfather who sort of hit his 90s and, he didn't want people to be making decisions for him. He still wanted to be treated like an adult. And I think that's probably one of the things, if we can actually give people that information in a gentle way so that they still feel empowered, they still feel like they've got some control, then hopefully that's going to lead to less conflict, at least between parent and child, between the children. Different story, perhaps.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things that really hit me with one of the clients that I saw was that the elderly parents are quite private around money. Money was never one of these things that people are open and they talk about for whatever reasons. They've either made mistakes along the way or they've got too much, they don't want anybody to know, whatever that is. And I was with one family, and Dad had passed away, and she tidied up Dad's estate. And she said, Karen, what Dad said to me on my auntie's deathbed, did you find the money? And she said, I have no idea what he was talking about, but it sits there with her.
Yeah.
That there might have been some money somewhere else that she didn't know about, like stashed under a blanket, whatever that was.
Yeah.
It still has it. And because Dad didn't tell anybody anything.
Yeah.
And I think by having these conversations, you get to unpack all the things they may or may not have. And then you're not going to necessarily overlook that money. But it also creates a level of trust on the way there. While you're opening up slowly to these things, you're creating that trust and winning trust back again in family relationships, where there's been lots of things in families that happen. We're all dysfunctional at one level.
Indeed.
So we've all got this stuff in. So it's about, well, how do I support my dad? How do I make sure my mum? How do I make sure these are happening and create that environment of trust where they feel comfortable? And that all the children are sharing the load.
Yeah, and look, I think it's interesting because it raises for me as well the idea that I think to have expectations clarified between parents and children about what do the children, what are the children entitled to at the end? I find it fascinating that, particularly when you get into the wills and estates area, there's all of this, but this is my share, this is what I'm entitled to. And there's this sort of overwhelming sense that people have an entitlement to mum and dad's money, which is money that mum and dad have earned. In most cases, I'm sure there's some cases where children may have contributed or had connection, but generally this is what mum and dad have earned. And the kids are going, well, this is mine. And I struggle with that as a concept. And I think that idea of having discussions in the family with, to what extent do the next generation live off an expectation of mum and dad's money versus kind of going out and getting their own.
And there's also an expectation around that. That's really true. I can give you lots of examples around some of that, but there's also an expectation of while mum and dad are alive that everybody should be treated equally. So I had one family come to me. There were 4 children, 2 sons, 2 daughters. One of them came and said, look, we need advice. Dad's got to go into aged care. And we talked through it. And he said, look, I'm going to go and talk to my 3 siblings. He came back and said, look, I want to do it, but my other 3 siblings don't want to get financial advice. I think they're wrong, but there's 4 of us and they don't agree. So I was like, okay, but I'm here if you need me. Anyway, I was talking to the financial advisor. There's a lot of financial advisors that don't specialise in this area, and it overwhelms them. So this financial advisor referred me to this, and I'd gone to do a presentation at their offices. And I said, look, thank you so much for that referral, but they decided not to go ahead with it. He said, oh, my goodness, I have to tell you what happened. And I was like, okay. So Dad has gifted one of the sons $8,000 for IVF treatment.
Yep.
The other son has got hold of mum and dad's bank accounts, obviously as power of attorney, seen that Dad's got given $8,000 to this other son, and took $8,000 out of it because he should have it too.
Oh, my goodness.
So this has created a huge amount of conflict in this family, where now the brothers aren't even talking to each other. Dad's still alive. They're still having to cope with everything that's gone on. And that estate is worth $4 million. Each of those children are going to get $1 million each when dad passes away. And for $8,000, they have now put their relationship on the line.
Yeah.
So I think my opinion about that was, well, if that's dad's money, then surely dad should be able to do it. And I know, and I've seen people do it. My mum might have done something for me, but for my sisters, she's done something different because I didn't need that.
Yeah.
What kind of swings and roundabouts? And it's that choice of, well, why should you get $8,000 and I have to give the other one $8,000? I know parents have got a sense of fairness, but they do it a different way. It's not always about dollars.
That's it. And you know, once again, it comes back to, well, you know, if dad there has capacity, dad's got that choice, dad can do that. The challenge comes then, well, when something like that's happened, how do you repair the family relationships? And I think this is one, you know, this is very much, you know, it's like a family breakup of a marital couple, but when you have a family breakup of a marital couple, they have to go through a legal process, and there's mediation and there's processes. With a family, there's sort of nothing to encourage people to actually go and try and have civilized conversations to clear things up. And so this is where, you know, there are still places that people can go to get an expert facilitator to come in and help them have those conversations so that it doesn't have to be the end of the story that the relationship is broken down. You can repair it. And, you know, in my world, I would love to see people really having access to that more so that they can redeem those relationships and have someone to create a safe space to talk about what's upset them that's led to those conflicts. Because, you know, if they don't have the conversation in a sort of structured manner, it can actually just get worse.
Yeah, and for $8,000, it's divided this family.
Yeah.
They will never be back to where they are. And probably the thing that's keeping them together right now is dad.
Yeah.
Once dad's not here anymore, you're going to get this stuff that's going on where you've got two sisters and two brothers, and the brothers are not talking to each other. And then the two sisters might invite them both to a wedding of their children. There's all this, lots of other stuff that's going to be impacted on the way.
Yeah.
And people don't see that.
No, look, it's really hard. And, you know, once again, I think that's where, you know, if someone in the family has the skills to have that difficult conversation, or if they bring someone else in, you can avoid a lot of heartache. Yeah. But Karen, I'm sure we could keep talking about this for a long time and you'd have lots of interesting examples. But just before we wrap up for the session, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you and have a discussion about what they might need in this area, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
They can call me on my mobile, which is 0413 313100, or they can email me at Karen@auxilium, AUXILLIAM.au.
Fantastic. And I'll put all of those details as well as some social media tags into the show notes. So thank you so much for joining me, Karen. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to working with you.
That's all for this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and learned something new that you can apply in your own negotiations. Remember, negotiation is a skill that can be developed and refined over time, so keep practicing and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on social media or email us directly. And if you liked this episode, please leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps us to reach more people and continue to produce high-quality content. Until next time, keep negotiating in real life.